they want to cover. So I want to start with just acknowledging what we all know, that this is going to be a Passover unlike any of those that have preceded it in our lifetimes. And whatever challenges you may have been through on a personal or familial basis in the past, nothing I think compares to what we are experiencing as a nation and as a world this year. So with all the other challenges that we are dealing with day in and day out, preparing for Passover can either seem like something just too overwhelming to think about and nothing to be bothered with, or you might say, I need something that I can rejoice in, something that's a little more fun and enjoyable for me and for my family. And even though it won't mean this year being able to gather around the table with those whom I love and I'm close to and friends who I want to introduce to these wonderful rituals, we're going to find other ways to do that. I've heard nonstop from people who have told me that they're going to be connecting with those who are not physically present through various virtual means, and that's actually going to be part of our discussion this evening, but I'm not going to touch on that. I want to touch on some of the things that we need to be doing as we get ready for the holiday. So obviously this being the festival when we eat matzah and no chametz, we should already begin getting rid of the chametz, removing all that stuff from our homes as much as possible. And we've been sending out forms for people to engage in the sale of chametz so that even if some of it remains in your home, you won't technically be the owner of it. This is a legal fiction which the rabbis created long ago and which we continue to make use of year after year. But it does require that you fill out a form, and this is, I think, easier than ever to do so online. We've made that available, and if you are in need of that, I believe you can find it through our website. But if you have any problems with that, send an email to me or Rabbi Hollander or to Edie, and we'll make sure to get that form to you. And in this way, the chametz that remains in your home, you will not technically be the owner of.
I did it this morning.
I was on a Zoom call this morning with one of the rabbis who teaches Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary and who's responsible for the sale of all chametz of the seminary. And he said that in any other year, all previous to this one, he would have done his best to eat all the chametz that he possibly could, consume it all in his home, and then actually be rid of whatever he wasn't going to eat. Whether that meant throwing it out or donating it to a food bank, he didn't specify. He said, but this year, he is actually counseling people to not go so far as to be rid of things and to feel it a necessity to have it out of your home. Take advantage of that legal fiction, sell your chametz, but hold on to what you need to, because we just don't know what's going to be in days to come. We should all be careful about discarding food willy-nilly when we know that already some of the basics are not necessarily available. And even though the supermarkets say that they'll be full, who really wants to go into the supermarkets when they only allow 10 people in at a time? If you are cleaning your home and koshering the kitchen or other places in your home where you have eaten chametz, typically we talk about koshering the kitchen. Anywhere else that has had chametz in it, you simply need to clean. It might mean just vacuuming that area, making sure that you haven't left a bag of peanuts or potato chips in the den, and you don't want to find those during the holidays. So go through the house, make sure there's nothing around. And if you've got items of clothing that might have crumbs in them, nothing better than throwing them in the washing machine. That is the perfect way to ensure that there's no real chametz in any of those items. Otherwise, you're going through pockets of your coats and things like that to make sure you didn't leave candy and gum in there, which yes, I am guilty of. I do that throughout the year and have to make a special check before the holiday. The search for chametz is a ritual that takes place on the night prior to the first Seder. Most people are familiar with it, but in case you're not, we set aside a little bit of time to make a declaration that we are about to search for chametz and to be rid of it. And in order that we say a bracha that is not levatala, taking God's name in vain, we're supposed to actually put some chametz around the house that we'll be searching for. And you can have a lot of fun with this. And hopefully we'll have a video to show you just how that could be done. I usually take 10 pieces of bread, scatter them around when the kids aren't looking, and then I make them each look individually around the house for where I hid them. So it's a little fun that we have the night before the first Seder. And you're supposed to do that with a candle, although you can use a flashlight, and a wooden spoon and a feather. And the chametz, bedikat chametz kits, as they're called, are often available in supermarkets and Judaica stores. Honestly, I haven't looked for one in many years because I keep using the same one over and over again. That's my tradition, rather than burning the whole thing at the end of the search. But on the morning of the first Seder, what you're supposed to do is bior chametz, the burning of chametz. And you can either do that with fire, and I participated in this on some occasions, or if you take your chametz and you pour some cleaning detergent on it, which would make it completely inedible, and you stick it out with the garbage, even if your garbage is not going to be picked up before the first Seder, before Passover starts, that's good enough. You have done your part for the burning of chametz, or the final exhuming of all chametz from your home. And in the morning, before the first Seder, there's actually another declaration that we make that any chametz that we are not aware of, that we might have overlooked, the smallest particles, all of this should be considered ka'afra da'ara, as if it's dust of the earth. It's no longer food that we would ever think of eating. And so now we are free and clear of all chametz. So shopping this year, obviously, for food, I imagine many people did it well in advance, but if you've been trying to do it during the coronavirus restrictions, it's been a little bit of a tricky situation. I haven't heard of any shortages of the necessary supplies. Going into the market and seeing empty shelves was scary. The good news is that there was plenty of matzah and grape juice and kosher for Passover products. The bad news is the napkins, paper towels, Kleenex, and other cleaning supplies were hard to come by, and most of us want those for the holiday as well. So you're on your own with that. It can't really help you. More good news, the Rabbinical Assembly that's our rabbinical organization for the conservative movement. It has a Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which sets halachic, Jewish legal policies for our movement. And each year they produce a document that tells you all the things that you should do in terms of cleaning and koshering your home, how to kosher a dishwasher and an oven and a sink, all those things readily found online. And we're going to have that on our page so you can easily access it. When I say our page, I mean the Temple Sinai page. And this year they've actually included some additional leniencies. So for example, Ashkenazim, those of Eastern European Germanic descent, typically don't eat kitniot, whereas Sephardim do. Well, already in 2005, this committee ruled that the consumption of kitniot by Ashkenazim in our movement was certainly permissible. And this year, they're saying it is advisable. Even if you have not permitted kitniot to yourself before, and even if you don't think you'll do it again next year, give yourself a break this year if you're having trouble getting into the market, finding the things that you typically do, and going through all of the regular food production processes. If you are eating kitniot, you are not eating chametz. It is not outlawed by the Torah. It is not outlawed by the rabbis. It is simply a custom that was instituted by the rabbis of the Ashkenazic tradition to create a fence around the rules so that we wouldn't accidentally eat what is really chametz. So if you want to eat beans, corn, millet, peas, rice, and soy, this year feel free to do it. All those things which are not chametz, but in fact just kitniot. They've also relaxed the restriction on eating from cartons and cans that you may have opened before the holiday, and which you in previous years and other times might have feared that perhaps because these were open, there might have been some accidental mixing of chametz in them. So I'm just going to be rid of those things before the holiday. This year they're saying don't be so cavalier with food. It's important that we have enough. And if it's a product that is completely free and clear of chametz, meaning that it's only one product that has not been made a mixture with other things, or that you have not yourself added anything to on purpose, then take advantage of a rule that says if chametz, which is less than 1/60th of the overall mixture in that can or carton, has entered there, if it's less than 1/60th before the holiday, it's as if it were null and void. It doesn't do anything to make the overall product chametz. So go ahead and eat it. The rule is slightly different on Passover itself. Even one small piece of chametz, if it's less than 1/60th, would make an entire batch of soup or cereal or whatever you're making invalid, unkosher. So you have to be more careful on the holiday. But prior to the holiday, if you have those things in your pantry already, don't be bashful about using them. There are more instructions about items that in the past you might have looked for a Passover, kosher Passover marking on, which they say this year you don't have to be quite as stringent about. And we'll send that out too, because it's all part of this Committee on Jewish Law and Standards email. And lastly, they said that, the last thing was really about feeling free to use those things that are already opened in our homes. So the idea was we're going to take questions at the end. If they're already assembling in your mind, just hold on to them. And I want to move now from those things which we'll be doing in our homes to prepare for Passover to getting ready for Seder and what Seder might be like. We recognize that in these crazy times which we live, where so few of us will be enjoying Seder at a Seder table ourselves, that we might find ourselves in the enviable position of now being a Seder leader ourselves and having to create the Seder, because we're not relying on the people to whose home we would have gone in prior years. So I want to start out by saying that whether you have a Haggadah in your home or not, they are easily accessible online. There are plenty of resources for downloading Haggadot. Two wonderful ones we've already begun to let you know about. One was already sent out in the email that went out with the advertisement for tonight, Feast of Freedom. That is the one that I actually use. It was created by our movement, again, by the Rabbinical Assembly. And another one, A Different Night, will be sent out shortly. But these are only two of many that you'll now be able to download. And even if you're sharing your Seder with people in far-flung places, can't actually be in the same room, it's possible for everybody to be looking at the same text, having the same Haggadah in front of them, so that if you want to have people participate through readings, you can definitely do that. I'll give you some ideas from my own experience with leading Sedarim, with leading Passover Seders. And I want to say that while I elaborate on certain things, I also condense certain things. And for anyone who's leading a Seder for the first time, condensing is key, because it's going to feel like a lot to take on your first time out. So I don't want you to feel like you have to do everything on the first go around. But if you do a little bit from each of the sections of the Seder, it'll be enough. And if you do a little bit more than you did last year, that's fantastic. I typically start out by welcoming everybody who's at my Seder and having them introduce themselves, because very often I've got new people who don't know others. And I like to do an activity at the beginning, like having everybody share their Hebrew name and talk about who they are named for. Because when we talk about this holiday, which celebrates what our ancestors experienced, let's think about our immediate ancestors and whose qualities we might wish to emulate. We also go around and ask people to say something that they're thankful for. And we should do that on every holiday, just like we should do that every Shabbat, perhaps every day. It's a nice thing to do, but if we're not in the custom of it, then make that a nice tradition for beginning your Seder. I also begin my Seder with funny songs. There are tons of these, again, online, and we'll make available to you a whole songbook that people have created of interesting lyrics for Passover set to popular melodies, tunes that you probably already know, and so will most of your Seder participants. And I like to sing funny songs at the beginning before we even get into the meat of the Haggadah itself, because I want to set a light mood. I want people to know that we're going to have fun. It's going to be an enjoyable evening. It's not going to be laborious. You can only imagine for people coming to the rabbi's home for the Seder, some of them are thinking, okay, we're in for a big one. And I want them to know that we're going to try to make it fun, especially when we've got a lot of kids around the table. I want them to know. And so what I also will announce at the beginning is that I am prepared to give out prizes. And I've got a lot of these in my store, well, in bags that I have collected and purchased over the years. So for good answers and good questions, people, it doesn't matter what age, are going to receive prizes. And that also, I think, makes it a bit of fun. So the Passover Seder itself, if you've ever looked in the Haggadah, is made up of 14 parts. Sounds like a lot of parts. And the reason we call it a Seder, an order, is because we're supposed to make our way through this order. Thank you, Rabbi Hollander, for putting up this wonderful graphic or text from My Jewish Learning, which is a fabulous resource for all kinds of Jewish things. And here, on this particular page, you'll see the 14 parts of the Seder and very short explanations of what each one is supposed to be about, so that you'll see what goes on in that section. Until we get to number 5, Magid, the first 4 sections are actually quite fast. They don't require a whole lot at all. The first one is Kadesh. We're reciting the blessing over the wine and formally beginning the festival by inaugurating it through sanctification, saying that it is holy. That's what the Kiddush is about. The Kiddush is in the Haggadah. If you just want to say the short version, Borei Pri Agafen, be my guest, you'll have 4 opportunities for that throughout the Seder. That's why we have 4 cups of wine. Each one of them gets its own blessing. From Kiddush, Kadesh, we move to Orchatz, washing. A lot is being made of hand washing these days, is it not? Well, I've actually seen some funny takes on this where people have created versions of the Passover Seder that involve a washing of the hands after every section. So you might wash your hands 14 times over the course of the evening. But if you're only going to do it according to the tradition, then you're still going to do it twice. There's this washing right at the beginning before we eat the karpas, the vegetable that reminds us of springtime. And there's no blessing with it, although a nice idea might be to just comment on the fact of how blessed we are to be able to celebrate in whatever fashion this year. So we wash our hands. I like the tradition of bringing a bowl and a pitcher to the table and passing it around so that people don't actually have to get up to wash their hands. Everybody can do it from their seats. And then we're going to eat the vegetable, which is a sign of spring, karpas. Usually I use parsley, but you can use other things like celery or a potato. I've seen that done as well. And we're going to dip this in salt water, so it's going to have a little bit of taste. Dipping potatoes in salt water, always good. Again, I use parsley and I like that. And it's supposed to be a reminder of spring and also of the tears that were cried by our ancestors. Again, the 4th part of the Seder, also very fast. We're going to take the 3 matzot and grab the middle one, because you're supposed to have 3 matzot on your table. And the middle one is the one that we divide for yachatz. We break it in half, and as we well know, half of it is going to be the afikomen, not eaten until the very end of the Seder, after the meal. So we set it aside, and I don't know how you do it in your homes, whether the Seder leader hides it and everybody has to look for it, or if you have kids steal it and then the Seder leader has to look for it. But either way, it's a fun part of the Seder. Now we get to Magid, the storytelling or narration. And this is where things can feel a little overwhelming, I would say, and start to drag. When I do Magid, mine takes anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a quarter. I try not to go more than that. And there's a lot to cover here, but if you want to do it, even the main parts, the key parts, you can certainly do it in 20 minutes or less. If you really needed to, you could keep it to 10 minutes. So how do we do that? Well, Magid begins with identifying the matzah. We've already broken the middle matzah, but now we're going to say what this is. This is the bread of affliction, halach ma'anya. And when we announce that, we also open our door. Twice during the Seder, we're supposed to open the door. And I like that because it's an opportunity for me to send kids off on an errand, to give them something to do. Otherwise, things could get a little bit boring if they just sat at their seats all night. So sending somebody to open the door, we say we want anybody who's hungry to come and eat. Everybody is welcome. And it's a great opportunity, if you wanted, to talk about how we provide for the needy in so many different ways. I'm not going to go into more of that just now. The next part is the 4 questions. So usually it's the youngest or younger people at your Seder who get to do this, but we often have a youngster lead it and everybody sort of responds and joins in. And the 4 questions, I would say this should not be skipped. Even if you don't sing them, read through them in English. And even though the Haggadah doesn't provide answers right away, because that will come out over the course of the Seder, if you want to give a short answer to each one now at the beginning, nothing wrong with that. The Magid continues by talking about how we were slaves and God saved us. And that's really the reason that we're sitting at a Seder, and proceeds to stories of rabbis who stayed up all night talking about the Exodus from Egypt. You can skip these. You don't have to do them. You can go right from the 4 questions to the 4 sons. I think it's worthwhile to mention the 4 types of children. They don't have to be sons, even though historically they were, but the children, who represent four different kinds of people: smart, not necessarily wicked or evil, but the ones who challenge us, who give us a run for our money, those who need things to be kept simple for them, not too elaborate, and those who don't know how to ask, either because they're too young, too inexperienced, or maybe they're simply not ready to participate in a way that allows them to. So we even need to tell the story in a way that they will understand it. I will tell you that right after this comes a long midrash, which I like a lot, but I often skip it. Yes, even I skip things in the Haggadah, and I typically will play a game with all my Seder participants, which gets me highlighting with them all of the interesting things of Passover that I think are worth mentioning. Then we're on to the 10 plagues. Take a drop of wine out of our cups. Don't skip that. Dayenu comes next. This is a fun one to sing, but if it's not a melody that you like, or you're not so comfortable with it, you could skip that too. Rabban Gamliel next has us pointing to the Pesach, that is the shank bone on our Seder plates, the matzah and the maror, so that we can identify what's important about them. Again, they're going to be discussed in other fashions. You don't have to talk about that. The most important verse in the entire Haggadah, perhaps, appears right after that. We say, B'chol dor v'dor. In every generation, each of us is commanded to see ourselves as if we ourselves left Egypt. That's why we're reenacting, not simply telling a story, not simply having a meal, but really reenacting so many parts of the original Passover. We're going to lift our cup, but we're not going to necessarily drink it just yet. And then we actually do drink the wine with a blessing. If you get this far, and again, you could have done that whole Magi thing in 20 minutes or less. Now it's a quick run right into the meal. It's rachsa. It's washing the hands again, this time with a blessing. It's motzi matzah. It's saying the blessing for motzi, which we say every time we eat bread, and now we add ala chilat matzah because this is a special kind of bread that we eat on Passover, the matzah. Then it's the maror, bitter herbs, and you can use horseradish or you can use a bitter herb. And I typically dip that into the charoset so that there is a mixture of the harsh as well as the sweet. We are reminded that Hillel used to take the various parts of what the Torah said we must eat. That was the korban pesach, the lamb, and the matzah and the maror, and he made a sandwich. He combined all those things. So we eat the Hillel sandwich, but of course without a Passover lamb to eat these days, since we don't have sacrificing privileges, we're going to instead use charoset with the maror and matzah, make a little sandwich, eat that, and boom, that's it. We have arrived at shulchan orech, the eating of the meal. I know for many people that this is where they typically stop. After they've eaten the meal and enjoyed some discussion together, then it's time to go home. There are a few more parts to the Passover Seder, if you're willing to make time for them. Safun, which is the dessert, that's when we actually eat the afikomen. So you pass that out, and that immediately is followed by barech, the blessing that we are supposed to recite after eating a meal. There are longer forms and there are shorter forms. And if you just want to say, thank you, God, for all I've enjoyed, zehu, that's enough. Now we are going to open the door once again, this time for Elijah. If you've got an Elijah's cup on your Seder table, this is the point in the Seder where you actually reference it. We're going to invite Elijah in because he's the herald of the Messiah. And just as the holiday of Passover allows us to celebrate the redemption of our ancestors from Egypt, we're looking forward to the future redemption, which will be announced by Elijah. And so he's got to be invited to the Seder. If you have the Feast of Freedom Haggadah, again, downloadable this year because we're making it available to everybody, then you'll find that there are some really nice readings in there, some of them difficult, about other periods of oppression that the Jewish people have experienced, including some Holocaust readings, all of which lead into our wish for Elijah. We sing Eliyahu Hanavi at my table. There's Hallel, the Psalms of Praise. There were two earlier in the Seder, which I just skipped over. You can skip over them then. You can skip over them now. I always say we're going to be doing this in synagogue, so feel free to come join us there. But if you like some of these melodies, sing them. And then there's a whole series of great songs at the end, including Who Knows One, I Know One, and My Father Bought a Kid for 2 Zuzim. Again, this is a fabulous part of my Seder. People look forward to this. Nobody's leaving right after the meal because they want to sing, at least the people who come to my Seder year after year. But this is for you to decide. If you have the time, if you have the inclination, if you enjoy singing and you can get people to stay. Again, if you condense things early on, maybe you're leaving yourself time for this. And then Nirtza, this is our fourth cup of wine. I forgot to mention the third cup of wine is drunk at the end of the Birkat HaMazon, the blessing after the meal. The fourth cup comes at the very end, Nirtza. This is when we wish each other L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Next year, may we be privileged to celebrate in Jerusalem. Ooh, I'm sweating. I just went through that so fast. I don't know if that made sense, but I really wanted to just emphasize that you can do it. There are all these parts, but anybody picking up a Haggadah, whether online or a real text, will find these parts outlined, and you can keep it as simple as you need to, based on the needs of your community, your gathering, the people who will be joining you.
No worries about taking notes. All of these resources and some of the things that Rabbi Wahlberg had mentioned are actually, if you look in your chat function, there's a link that I had shared, a Google Doc, and there we'll be sharing that later on. Some of the resources that Shira is about to share, as well as that I'll share in just a moment. All those things be found on in the chat, and we'll share that later.
So Rabbi Wahlberg mentioned that there are great Haggadah resources. So I just wanted to recommend a few to you. So the first one, if you have young children, I would definitely recommend the products that PJ Library has come out with. There's both a workbook, which is a great activity to do prior to the Seder, and also a Haggadah, which is extremely user-friendly, that could be used during the actual Seder. So I'm going to share it with you really quickly. So here's the PJ Library Seder, and it's really beautiful, and it also is user-friendly, has nice commentary on the side. Obviously, like what Rabbi Wahlberg said earlier, by no means do you have to do all of it, but it's really great. I would recommend, actually, I don't even think it's great for just children. I think it's great for people of all ages. So here's just a snippet of what it looks like. I love it that it's beautiful. So it's something, if you had it either printed it at home or used it from your computer, it's something that would be visually appealing to look at. They also have a workbook, which is pretty cool, that the kids could color in beforehand, and there's questions just to kind of get them in the mood for the Seder and to get their mind focused on something else other than their online schooling and the fact that they're trapped at home. So get them in the mood. And the other Haggadah I want to share with you is called A Different Night. And again, all these resources we're going to share with you a little later. This is definitely a more sophisticated family Haggadah, but what's beautiful is that you could really pull from it and add little bits of commentary. There's a table of contents. It's really easy to go through. So if you're the leader and you're using one of the other Haggadot, but you like something from this one, you could bring it in very easily and you could prep it all in advance. And these are just our recommendations. Feel free to take it or leave it, but we're going to give you a lot of them to choose from to make it easier for you when you are doing your own Seder.
Thank you, Shira, for sharing with us about all the great Haggadot that are there, that are available. I know Shira and I had a conversation earlier about is it best to have one Haggadah or to have multiple different ones? I know my personal preference is to use different ones because I think it's fun to see if there's a translation difference or if there's something else that you might notice a commentary. And yet I also recognize that it's much more helpful to be on the same page and to be able to announce those things. And this is where we want to get to the realities of today, recognizing that MahNishtana, this Pesach is different than all other Pesachs. And that the Rabbinical Assembly, in having conversations, while we don't use technology in this way on Yom Tov or Shabbat, the Rabbinical Assembly recognizes that this year it's important to experience Pesach and have Seder and not to travel, but rather to do it with our own household, those that we are currently at the residence that we're at, and not to travel like we might usually do so. And that being said, recognizing that that might be because of medical reasons, or also that even when we're isolated, that there's also recognizing that it's hard not to be with family at this time, there's two recommendations. One would be is have a Seder with the family that you're with, or also it's possible to do a Seder by yourself. And I also recognize that that might not be what people it might be tough to do that. And so therefore, using technology for those, this might not be a path that they're interested in taking. And I appreciate Rabbi Wahlberg of showing us all those steps of how to lead a Seder or conduct a Seder for ourselves, or also those that are around us. But also this year, we might have the experience of participating in the Seder with people that might not be physically with us in the same room, using a virtual Seder. So doing that, I wanted to share with you, again, in our resources, the Rabbinical Assembly actually has a long piece about what are best practices of doing so. They recommend, for those that are concerned about using technology or electricity on Yom Tov, of using something that they set up before Yom Tov starts, before the holiday starts, and to leave on. For those that are more comfortable with using technology in different ways, feel free to do so as well. I wanted to share with you a few different resources. One is through One Table, a great organization. They actually do a great job of comparing for ourselves this year of the different video platforms that there are. Right now we are on Zoom, and Zoom is great for those that are having group gatherings. One of the things that we've learned from our own experience with the virtual minyanim, or even in a class like this, is asking people to mute themselves. When talking, it's easy for us to all have a conversation, but it is hard, difficult, when we want to all sing together. So that is one drawback from having using this technology in any platform, is there is no technology right now that allows us all to sing. Zoom, you can actually do for free if you'd like. You can create your own account, and you can invite friends to do, you can share your link just how we use the link for you to join us today. The only thing about the free accounts is that it will end after 40 minutes. You can only have a call for 40 minutes. What you might have to do is afterwards, after the 40 minutes are up, it will cancel the call. Everyone then can join the same link that you used before, and they can join back in. If you would like to have an uninterrupted experience, just like how we're having right now with Temple Sinai, how we have services that go longer than 40 minutes and gatherings, there is a way you can upgrade for $15 a month to have no time limits if you'd like that. Another option is Google Meet. Google Hangout, I guess, is what the original thing is. For family members that have Gmail accounts, this is free and it works, and they recommend using this in the Chrome browser. Another one is FaceTime. If family or friends, if you have Apple products, and that's the platforms you use, you're able to do video chatting with one another, just like placing a phone call. You can add more people to this call. The only drawback is that you have to have an Apple product to do this, and FaceTime can accommodate up to 32 people. The only thing is it's hard to have more than 4 screens. It's harder to see the people, like how on Zoom, how you're able to see a lot of us all at one time. There's one more that he suggests here, but I'm actually not familiar with it, so I won't go any further with that. There's a few other things that I wanted to share with you about having a virtual Seder. With the virtual Seder, there's some really great ideas that are out there, and I wanted to pull out some of the ones that I actually really liked. Is that creating a virtual Seder, I think it's important that we, just like any other gathering, is to have some schmooze time. Think about whenever you're invited to a Seder, if it's supposed to start at 7 o'clock, well, you probably don't sit down to the table until 7:15 because you're probably in the kitchen schmoozing or helping each other out. And so too with when you're creating your own Seder virtually, give some time for people to get acquainted with one another, to hang out, to talk with one another, and to schmooze. a few other things that the RA, the Rabbinical Assembly, does suggest is that if you're going to do a virtual Seder, is to have a Seder plate at each location. And that could be the minimum. And then also to have that everyone, regardless of where you are, to have access to wine or grape juice, 3 matzahs, because those are the 3 matzahs that we have on the Seder table, as well as to have access to green vegetables for karpas, a bitter vegetable for maror, as well as salt water. And a Haggadah, what you could do is you could all be using the same one, perhaps either digitally by using one of these resources that we're sharing, or it could also be, if you feel comfortable of doing so, of screen sharing on Zoom. For those that are on the computer right now, you'll see that there's a green button, and there's a green button at the bottom of the page. I'll show you in 1 second on my own screen. You know what? That didn't work. The green button at the bottom of the page of your screen has a share button, and there you can actually share a PDF or perhaps a website that you have open. One of the things that we've been using for our services here in Minions is using the website called Sefaria. Thank you. Well, I'll take that out. One of the websites we use a lot of sharing access to a Jewish text is using the website called www.sefaria.com. And there you actually have access to all of the Haggadah or any other Jewish text you would want to use. And so using a link, either shared in the chat or also by posting it, by sharing it on your screen, that's another way to share text with one another. Another thing I think is really nice to do is to perhaps at this time to also reach out to friends, and you can do e-cards to share the Passover feeling with one another. I know when we feel kind of isolated right now, not being able to be with family friends, but being able to share greetings with one another through email is a nice way to do it as well. Another suggestion I saw that was really so sweet is that in this time leading up, perhaps virtually, you're not all gathering together for a meal. And while you might be sitting there having a meal together, one really beautiful idea is that if you share perhaps on a Google Doc, where many people can collaborate and share different things, if you have a Gmail account, or either through email as well, is to share family recipes. I know one of the really nice things that I got when I moved off to college was my mom put together in a binder all of her family recipes that we grew up with as kids. And so in college, yes, I called my mom every once in a while to ask her for a recipe, but it was really nice to have them all there. So if you have family recipes for Passover that you want everyone to share, it would be really great to share that now, so that even during your virtual Seder, you can all share that delicious, favorite family recipe. Or another option is, even for those that aren't comfortable with the virtual Seder, is to also perhaps cooking beforehand, of FaceTime with one another, or video chatting, or even just calling. And while you're doing all the same thing of preparing for the Seder and preparing for Passover, to do all those things at the same time. I just want to wrap up with just a few other tips that I've found from running our virtual minyanim. It's really helpful to send the link or instructions to people in advance. Another thing that we found is that if you send those links right before the start time, it's even more helpful as people will find their way to your gathering much easier. I also mentioned earlier about the schmooze time, but it also gives a chance for people connect at different times. Not everyone will sign on at the right time. Also, practice makes perfect. Try a run through as a host to practice using the technology, as well as invite guests that maybe need a little bit more assistance to practice as well ahead of time. And another thing is, if you're going to do screen sharing, just as a warning, is it does show you all of your tabs and such. So if you want to clean up your tabs or any bookmarks or your desktop on your computer, it's kind of like welcome people into your home. So it's just a fair warning about some nice practices to do. Before we open up to questions, again, all of these resources are shared in a document. There's one thing I do want to mention before I forget, is that another great resource within our own community is the Temple Sinai gift shop is currently selling kosher wine. If you are in need of wine, you can email tsinagiftshop@gmail.com, and they will make home deliveries for kosher wine from our community that also supports the sisterhood.
Are we ready for questions, rabbis?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
I got one earlier that I wanted to share. Someone privately messaged me. So here's a question about, some people aren't used to doing their prep for Passover. Maybe they have family. So how does one handle not being able to, they don't have pots and pans or dishes of their own for cooking?
So this was actually talked a little bit about on the call that I was on earlier today, because the assumption typically is that people will either have separate pots and pans, dishware, silverware that they purchase just for the holiday, set it aside when the holiday's done and bring it back out the next year, or that they have things that can be koshered, that can be used throughout the year, but then in preparation for the holiday, they are made as if they were brand new. And it's really about creating a status for them so that as if they've been unused. So when you purchase silverware from the store, you get to decide whether you're going to use that for meat or for dairy. And once you've decided, you're supposed to use it exclusively for that. But if something gets confused, or if now you want to make it kosher for Passover, if you take that fork and you place it in a pot of boiling water, which has been prepared properly, then when it comes out of that water and is run under cold water, now all of a sudden it has its original status and it can be used in any fashion you like for meat, for dairy, or for Passover. So on the guidelines that the Rabbinical Assembly has created, one of these documents that we will share with you, it actually goes through the steps. It tells you exactly what needs to be done for anything that you might own, have in your kitchen. If something is wood, it cannot be koshered. If it is metal, it can be koshered. If it is metal and has plastic handles, now you've got a problem, not likely to be koshered. But typically, if it's used in an oven, or if it comes into contact with fire, so then it is going to have extreme heat, be subjected to extreme heat, like with a blowtorch, or perhaps in your oven at the highest heat in order to bring it back to its original status. And other things, as I said, can either have water, boiling water placed in them, and then you cause the water to overflow it. That will make a metal pot neutral again, or you place things into that water and they can become kosher in that fashion. There are a lot of details to this. And so if you are at a stage now where you're not going to be able to go buy new things and you're uncertain about the koshering process, let me know, or let Rabbi Hollander know individually, and we'll walk you through just changing over a couple of things. It is also possible for the most part to use disposables. And I've got a lot of disposable tins, and we have a lot of plasticware and paper plates, and part of that is used during the holiday as well.
I want to share one resource that we shared in the document that I shared earlier. This was put together in a congregation in Chicago by Rabbanit Leah Sarna, someone I know personally. And what she did for her community was kind of for people that perhaps have never had to prepare themselves for Passover before. She kind of does a great job. It looks like a long list, but I promise you it's actually really helpful. She goes through all the things you might need. Such as talking about, you might just need one sharp meat knife, or something of how to also, you can take your metal utensils that you have currently and kosher them for Passover. She also kind of walks you through all the things you would need to make Seder on your own that you might not have thought about before. There's some other great resources as well that kind of also walk you through if you're not used to cooking recipes for Passover of non-cooked requirements, as well as things you can make on the stovetop, if in case you're worried about not having all access to things. But I thought it was just a really fun resource that kind of goes through different elements, things you can make in the microwave, things you can make in one pot as well.
And glassware, if you have like glass mugs that you haven't actually cooked in, meaning you haven't put them in the microwave and cooked something in it, but you've just simply poured hot water or cold water into it, those can be kosher just by washing them thoroughly. Other questions? Interesting. Okay,
I have a question.
Oh, hi, Debbie.
Debbie. Hi, Rabbi. So I just tried clicking on that first link, and it opened up a page in a PDF that was for hiding the matzah, I believe. I just
The
wondered.
chametz.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's Seder, the book that you recommended, the first one, if there's a way to provide that link, Feast or Freedom, on this chat.
I'm reposting it right now.
Thank you.
There's a link that I just posted again that says all the links shared or referred to this evening.
Yes.
If you open up that document, it will have multiple pages of many different links. And there it has a link to all the Haggadot. In there, there's also another Google document that has a list of even more online downloadable Haggadot that we didn't even mention this evening.
Okay, great. So how do you, when you open it up in the browser as we're doing Zoom, is there a way to save it? Like or when you close, are we going to be?
You're right. Nothing in the chat will be saved. Everything we're going to try to put onto our website, as well as the recording from this evening as well. So feel free to open up that Google document and copy and paste or save to your computer as well.
Okay, copy and paste works. Thank you.
And Rabbi Sam, you sent this around with the email for this session tonight, correct?
Correct. That was sent in an email on Sunday.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat. Just want to make sure you see it. Do you run your oven and dishwasher at high temps to kosher as well? Same with microwave.
Yes, well, to a degree. So let's talk the dishwasher for a moment. A dishwasher, if it's all metal, you simply have to clean it as best you can to make sure there aren't food particles in there. If there's a trap that holds food particles, make sure the trap is cleaned. And then if you run it on an empty cycle with detergent, that koshers it. Rabbi Sam, anything you want to add to that? Or that sounds good?
Sounds good.
Okay. It was covered this morning, so I thought it was on safe ground. Then when it comes to an oven, historically, it has been suggested that if you have a self-cleaning oven, you should use the self-cleaning cycle, and that will burn off anything. The rabbi who spoke to us this morning counseled us against that. He said it is a fire hazard, and he is very concerned about people turning up their ovens or self-cleaning because it makes them so hot, some of them 1,000 degrees. So he said if you clean it well and you turn it up to 500 degrees, then that should be sufficient. You leave it on at that heat for, I usually leave mine on for an hour at that heat, and then that makes it fine to use on Passover. If you can take the grates out, the shelving out, and scrub that also is helpful.
I just want to share some things that have been shared with me also with some people and some helpful recommendations. One person said about the live streaming, Zoom does allow for recording just as we're doing right now. The Rabbinical Assembly does not recommend recording of not doing that on Yom Tov. Again, if that's your call for your own family, if you'd like to make this a keepsake for future generations. The other thing was about assigning parts ahead of time. I know Rabbi Wahlberg had talked a lot about how to create an interactive Seder. Another thing, especially on these different virtual platforms, it's hard all to talk at once. And so to do so, it would be really helpful of assigning ahead of time people so that you don't have to constantly be muting and unmuting people during your Seder to allow for more organization, but also more participation as well.
I have another question. This is Debbie. Can you share that one link for Feast or Freedom? I don't see that on the list. Or am I missing it?
I will repost it.
Thank you. I did open up the link in helpful resources, but I don't see that Seder book. And it's you gave a high regard, so I'm interested in that one. that Shira shared. Yeah.
The one that Shira had shared with high regards was the PJ library.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
I see that. That one's on here, on your list. Okay.
Can I ask another question about the kosher?
Thank you.
Yes, Laurie.
So my question, you mentioned about metal racks in your dishwasher. What if you don't have metal racks? That's number one part of the question. And can you, once your dishwasher or prior to your dishwasher, I don't know, being kosher, can you kosher glassware in there then on a full cycle?
Well, again, glasses that have not actually had cooking take place in them, meaning you haven't, like if you had a glass,
Like a serving tray or a serving plate? That's what I'm questioning.
yeah, serving tray or serving plate. So items have been put on them, but the cooking wasn't actually done on them. So then it's just a matter of thoroughly cleaning them, and
Okay.
they can be considered kosher or Passover. So the dishwasher would definitely do that, just as you could do that by hand. And as far as ceramic inserts in your dishwasher as opposed to metal ones, so that's a problem. And
Yeah, I don't know, but the racks, I don't think they're all metal.
They're metal, but they're coated.
Coated with plastic, probably.
Plastic wrap.
that is a good question. I'm going to have to go back and look at the guidelines from the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, because I don't remember what they specifically said about that.
And microwave?
In a microwave, you clean it thoroughly, and then you take a cup or a mug, something that would be kosher for Passover, and you put water in it, and then you set it. You set the wave to cause that to boil and become steam, and it's the steam taking place in the microwave that actually koshers it.
I would recommend for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
When I was a younger rabbi, I had read somewhere that in order to kosher glasses, that you needed to soak them for 72 hours, changing the water every 24. We took over the bathtub in one part of our house, and I was running back and forth there every day to change the water with all of our glasses in there. If you were a participant or a guest at my home during that time, I apologize. We did clean everything very well after the soak in the bathtub, but subsequently I learned that that is a baba maisa. It is not necessary, and I wasted a lot of time.
What he's also not saying is also the gefilte fish that he was making for his fresh gefilte fish was also swimming in the bathtub at the same time with the glasses.
That's right. That's right. The idea of every participant having their own little Seder plate where they have all the elements that you're going to refer to and eat during the Passover Seder, that's something we've been doing for years. It is a big time saver if you don't have to constantly be passing these things around the table. If they're already right in front of everyone, they have their own egg, they have their own maror, they have their own charoset. So we still have a Seder plate that I point to when I'm talking about these things, but everybody having that in front of them, it's great. It takes a little extra work when you're preparing for your Seder, but people love it.
We might have time for one last question because the time is 7:24, and this account will be used for evening minyan.
Yes, we answered every single question. Not one remains. This is fabulous. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for all the information.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was great. Rabbis.
Thank you for joining. Usually we like to keep the chat open for people to share with each other and catch up. But because evening minyan is starting in 5 minutes, I'm going to be ending this session. And feel free to join us for evening minyan at 7:30. And you can find the link back to the email that was just sent out that brought you here.
And we are going to share them on our website.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Send that
much.
out.